Larsen.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I think there's two items that I would like to cover under this question. One is affordable housing, and the other is a living wage. I believe we need to maintain an adequate supply of affordable housing using a combination of existing housing as well as new construction or new housing. I think we need to find ways to offer incentives to neighborhoods to maintain and upgrade existing housing, and if incentives are determined to be the way to go, the good way to go, then I would strongly encourage that we promote energy efficient upgrades, including but not limited to solar and geothermal. I think we should find ways to hold down property taxes in neighborhoods that undergo significant changes. We need to ensure that those on fixed or low income that those that are on fixed or low incomes will not be taxed out of their home. We need to plan. We will not be able to do all things for everybody, obviously, but we should prioritize the needs and develop a plan that makes the biggest long-term impact to the livability of our neighborhoods. As far as the living wage goes, I personally believe that any adult who is willing to work a 40-hour work week in and week out, show up and do their job, should not have to rely on welfare to maintain a modest lifestyle. This wrongfully strips people of their dignity. I would encourage and offer incentives to companies to move to Lawrence that are willing to pay a wage that at minimum supports a modest living. And I would also encourage existing companies that do not pay a living wage to raise their pay scale or possibly offer incentives to raise their pay levels to levels that would support a modest living. We should encourage companies that consider employees access to welfare as part of their, we should not encourage companies that consider their employees access to welfare as part of their payroll plan. And I would also, I also believe very strongly that companies do have a social responsibility to pay their employees a living wage. Thank you.
How do you interpret the results of the election last April, and how will that influence your decisions as a commissioner?
The citizens of Lawrence spoke very, very loudly and very clearly about many aspects of their governing body during this last election. They spoke about the overuse and improper use of tax abatements and other incentives. They spoke about the need to thoroughly vet the merits of a project, about actively listening to citizen voices. Citizens felt that some commissioners just weren't listening, and some had no interest in what citizens had to say. They felt like they said they needed a more transparent government. Projects were being pushed through without transparency or adequate information. I think this election spoke to Lawrence's stated commitment to be a sustainable community. And sustainability includes ensuring that projects are economically viable, environmentally friendly, and socially acceptable. All of these three criteria have to be equally balanced in order to meet that sustainability commitment. Many of the controversial issues were not socially acceptable. The citizens felt the system was out of balance, so they used the biggest tool available in their toolbox to demand balance and make their voice heard. They voted. And they voted in those who promised that the citizen voices would be heard and the citizens' voices would play a vital role in their decision-making process. What I will do, if elected to be on this commission, is I will ask more questions, I will actively listen, I will weigh the evidence, and make sure I understand why people think the way they do, especially if it is a point that I have not heard of before. And I will ensure that those who I both agree and disagree with will fully know why I voted yes or no on a particular project. Thank you.
The city of Lawrence has a population of nearly 93,000, and yet on any given Tuesday, City Hall hosts less than 30 citizens at our weekly meeting. As a seated commissioner, what are your plans to engage the community who do not attend meetings in the process?
To start, I would want to know a little bit more about the streaming website that we have where you can sit at home and watch the meetings on TV. And I would also want to know how commissioners feel about this level of participation. Do you consider it to be an active participation? And should we further engage this method to make it more interactive with the commissioners? That's one tool. I believe another tool is to encourage participation is that the commission be fully transparent in their processes. This could alleviate some of the apathy that we see. I believe that more trustworthy and transparent that we are as a collective body, the more apt that citizens will want to engage because they trust that their voice matters. Another tool that I would support is using a larger space when discussing controversial issues. This sends a very strong signal that as a governing body, we want a large participation. It's wanted and it's expected for these issues. And of recent, social media, I believe, is being used as a public forum. I cannot see myself using this type of forum. I would be fearful that I would post something inappropriately, inadvertently, or it would be misinterpreted. So prior to voting on a project, I believe it is vital to allow citizens to gauge their commissioners both before the commission meetings and after an item has been discussed by the commissions at the commission meetings. Thank you.
The City Commission has set priorities and goals. How will you assist the Commission in being able to meet its goals?
I'm going to use an example of how I ran my business when we were going through the goal process, or just the daily, weekly way we operated. So as with any business, it is vital that we would stay focused on our goals. We did this by following a very stringent process to meet these goals. One of our processes included weekly discussions with managers about our short-term goals as well as our longer-term goals. We started each and every week, every single Monday of the year at 6 a.m. We had a meeting that included myself, my field services managers, and my director of operations. During this meeting, we would discuss the week's projects, the field employees' issues, and short and long-term issues with equipment. By the end of the meeting, we had a plan to ensure our field crew had a successful week. At 6:30 a.m., our field services manager would meet with his field crew and begin loading equipment and supplies for the week. At the same time, our director of operations would prepare for our financial meeting. At about 8 or 9 a.m. in the morning, our director of operations and myself would have a financial meeting. This meeting included a review of our current profit and loss sheet, our receivables, our payable, our cash flow, labor, and overtime hours. We had a key set of indicators that we looked at each week to ensure the short and long-term viability of our company. In addition, we would discuss, among other things, our long-term goals, such as adding to our core products to increase revenue, the need to replace equipment, and maintaining and growing the business. By the end of our Monday morning meetings, we had a solid plan to ensure our week was successful and to ensure our long-term goals were on track. To meet the broadly stated goals of this commission, it is vital that we develop a process and crystallize our goals so that each piece can be tracked and successfully implemented. My business practices would allow me to bring this process-oriented approach to the commission discussion of their stated goals. Thank you.
What do you think a commissioner can do to encourage constructive conversations on controversial issues?
I think the initial thing we should do is build trust through transparency of the process. We need to pay close attention to citizens' feedback on the process and incorporate citizens' ideas when it's warranted. We need to find a bigger space for discussion of controversial issues. This would signal that the Commission expects and wants to hear more voices. And I would also model constructive participation. I would be thoughtful in commissioners' remarks and thorough in the research, and assure that citizens have access to all the information on which to base their opinions. An example of this is some citizens felt that they did not have access to sufficient information regarding options for the Lawrence Police Department. The old adage on this is that a confused customer never buys. It is so true in this situation.
What constitutes a desirable, healthy neighborhood that you would wish to live in?
Leslie, when I was writing this, the answers or developing my answer for this question, I realized that I actually described my own neighborhood. I really believe I live in the perfect neighborhood in Lawrence, the most perfect neighborhood in Lawrence. And what I believe that to be is, to start with, is a well-funded public neighborhood school. I live in the Hillcrest neighborhood. Hillcrest is my neighborhood school. And my school was targeted for closure several years ago, and it was a very, very concerning time for my neighbors and as well as myself. So it's important to the future of our neighborhood that our school will be there, because to me, a school means that your neighborhood has a future, and that essentially there is another generation to come along. The other item that I find desirable is that our neighborhood is secure and safe, that we have easy access to police and fire services. I live at 1117 Avalon Road, and right now that entire road has been under construction for all summer, since June, and they are upgrading all of our water lines. They are adding fire hydrants, and the reason they're upgrading everything is because they want to bring everything up to fire code, which makes me feel very secure. I also believe in face-to-face relations with the neighbors as well as police so that we're more responsive to each other's needs. And I think we need a trust in the predictable zoning and tax code. Property values will be protected and residents, especially those on fixed and low incomes, will not be taxed out of home ownership. And I believe also that neighborhoods need to have a voice in their future. So that means a healthy neighborhood association where the collective voice can be heard and respected. I think this bows to the possible need to look at a different form of governing in Lawrence. An election based on precincts will more likely give neighborhoods an equal voice for their specific needs. I believe a good neighbor has a sense of community. It embraces diversity within the neighborhood in that you know your neighbors, they know you, and you can watch out for each other's back, essentially a sense of reciprocity. Thank you.
This is our lengthiest question of the night, so prepare yourself. Get comfortable.
Has my time started yet?
Yes, you will be out of time when we get to the end of the question. 2 weeks ago, the Lawrence City Commission was faced with the decision of whether or not to give the Lawrence Arts Center $100,000 in transient guest tax funds for the purpose of expanding the Free State Festival. 2 commissioners were in favor of full funding, and 2 were opposed. As the 5th member of the commission, you would have been the deciding vote to break that tie. Explain how you would have voted and why.
First of all, Matt, on this issue, I watched it originally when it was aired, and I do have just a little side note for you, and that is I'm a Douglas County Master Gardener, and your comments regarding flowers, I love them. I have a long list of flowers I love, but I have to admit, mums are not one of them, so just so you know. There's no doubt in my mind that the Free State Festival has the ability to be a national signature festival for Lawrence, and that the city should make every concerted effort to support it. But based on the information that was presented during the meeting, I would have supported the $60,000 vote, but not the $100,000 vote. The best option, obviously, would have been to fully fund the festival at the $100,000 level. However, to be a good steward of our taxpayer dollars, I have to ensure that every project that comes before the commission is treated equally and fairly. And as we all know, we do not have infinite resources. Trying to fund projects in the middle of a budget cycle complicates matters even more. We should not jeopardize our 2016 reserves. Thank you.
Okay. What single issue that this commission has decided did you disagree with? Why, and what would you have done differently if you were a commissioner?
The one item that I would have done differently is to pull a change order for the Bircham Park River Trail System project. This was on the consent agenda, and I would ask that it be set aside for further review. It was voted on September 22nd, Commissioners' meeting. As a little bit of background, my company bids on approximately 150 projects per year, and sometimes we have to deal with change orders. We maintain a base of about 200 active projects that are in various stages of completion. Because change orders are sometimes a point of contention, it is very important to ensure the design is correct and the bid is clearly written to minimize the need for change orders. On this particular project, the original bid was spec'd out to include a mix of materials to balance trail, surface, durability, and cost. The staff report for the change order indicated that the change order is needed due to observed wet conditions in 2015. That concrete would provide a better long-range surfacing option. My concerns and questions regarding this change order are: how was this project spec'd out? Did the vendor or the city design the project? I ask this because this area of Lawrence is well known to be in a floodplain. Floodplains can be notoriously unstable and have many periods of dry and flooding conditions. The trail is being built between 15 and 25 feet of the largest river in Kansas. Were these facts taken into account during the design process? If so, what other information was used to determine that a mix of materials versus all concrete would be durable on this type of physical setting? The change order price increase is now more than the next low bidder that bid on the original contract. How would this change order impact their pricing? I realize that the contract has already been signed by the city, and these questions were likely addressed during the design and bid phase. For transparency purposes, it would be prudent to provide a full accounting of the process so citizens can trust the process and commissioners can make an informed decision. Now, I realize this is a small dollar amount in the big picture, but if we can't get these small things right, how can they expect us to get the big things right?
There's a lot of discussion going on in Lawrence, Kansas right now about development in the downtown area, the blocks of downtown. And it seems like every project that's come forward has a public incentive package to it. Are you a supporter, or can you explain, do you or do you not support the use of public incentives in our downtown district for new housing, new retail, whatever it may be?
I think many of the projects that have recently received incentives has gone way overboard. However, I do think there are projects that merit it. In the downtown area, I think that the Eldridge project, because it is a historical building, would merit that incentive. And however, I think that the amount given was 85%, which is above what is recommended in our economic development documents. So I think it went too far. I would also look at projects that merit and they provide a service. I think the grocery store issue could be a potential for that. I think that we would need to make sure that projects that are brought forth, that they are sustainable projects. Do they meet that 3-tier criteria? And is it balanced in that criteria? And if it can meet that 3-tier criteria and is socially acceptable, then I would back projects of that nature, but within the constraints of the guidelines that we have for economic development.
I'm going to suggest at this point that we do the 2-minute closing, and then we are going to break about 20 minutes before we start the public comment section, okay? So,
first of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the commissioners for the ability to participate in this really unique process. And I'm humbled to find myself in such a good company. So as much as I would like for you to select me for this job, I will respect your decision, knowing that whoever you choose from this group will be an added asset to this governing body. However, I do believe you should choose me for the job, and here's why. I have 30 years of experience working within a governing system, first as a state employee and then as a business owner in a highly regulated field. I bring a unique technical skill that I think will benefit the Commission's collective discussions and decision-making. As in my business, I can fully appreciate the importance of the trust factor in a relationship between management, staff, and Commission. My business required that I cultivate the ability to hear and understand stakeholders' views and to respond to those very sensitively. I worked effectively with neighbors and businesses whose interests are sometimes in concert and sometimes in conflict. I have a strong background in state government that has helped me understand very complex regulations, contracts, and negotiations. My business had yearly revenues in the $1.6 to $1.8 million range and annual payroll of $600,000 to $700,000. I handled our finances as a fiscal conservative. I kept my business solvent, grew it thoughtfully and carefully, and operated within the business's means. I would approach the city budget exactly this way, as a good steward of taxpayer dollars. It's a privilege to serve one's community, and if I'm selected, I will do the best for the citizens of Lawrence and my colleagues on the Commission. And I will do so humbly and with gratitude. Thanks for the opportunity.